The Apple iPhone, a device that sells by the hundreds of millions. A device that, whether you love it or you hate it, it is a worldwide recognized device in the hands of hundreds of millions, that has a cult-like following, capable of forming lines miles long on launch day. With the current state of smartphones being slower sales and more iterative updates year over year, the Apple strategy has been a tick-tick-tock cycle, with a major design change followed by 3 to 4 years of a similar design, mostly performance and camera improvements leading the way. The iPhone 11 Pro series phones are a great example of the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They carry over very similar designs from the iPhone X launched way back in 2017. From the notched OLED displays to the rounded rectangular design, much design-wise has remained unchanged between the standard 5.8-inch screen-wielding iPhone 11 Pro to the larger Pro Max. But does that mean you should skip out on this generation of iPhone in favor of the Talk update coming this year for the 2020 model year? I'm Dave with TechDove. Let's find out. The first thing you see, and the part of the phone that you interact with most often, is the display. We are on the third year of OLED iPhones, and not much has changed. That's not to say that nothing at all has changed, but the average consumer would be hard-pressed to tell the difference side by side with last year's XS Max or XS. That display is a 5.8-inch OLED on the 11 Pro and a 6.5-inch OLED on the 11 Pro Max, with a resolution of 1242 by 2688, giving it a pixel density of 458 ppi, and an aspect ratio of 19.5 by 9, giving it a screen-to-body ratio of 83.7%, with slim bezels all around, headed up top by a notch, which houses the Face ID True Depth camera system. More on that later. These specs all align with the specs of the XS Max. However, the difference comes in contrast and brightness, with the 11 Pro Max having a max sustained brightness of 800 nits, with a 1200 nit peak brightness, whereas the XS Max was 660 and 1000 respectively, while its contrast ratio is up from 1 million to 1 to 2 million to 1, which is worthy of a buzzword-filled name like Super Retina XDR. This display is one of the best looking displays on the market, which is no surprise since Apple is known for great displays and it's once again manufactured by Samsung. The colors pop, its high brightness makes HDR content look great while maintaining great viewing angles. This is one of my favorite displays of 2019, even if the Note 10 Plus display edges it out ever so slightly. Here's hoping the next batch of flagships for 2020 will have 90 or 120Hz refresh rates on their displays. These days, it's pretty difficult to find a poorly built phone. After my previous video on what is one of my favorite built phones of all time, because I'm a sucker for titanium. The iPhone 11 Pro Max, which I'll be referring to as simply the iPhone from now on, is constructed from 2 sheets of glass on top of a stainless steel frame. And boy is this thing heavy. It's a very solid feeling phone, with a nice hefty weight of almost half a pound. That's right, 7.97 ounces to be exact. It features what Apple is yet again calling the strongest glass on a smartphone. Not something I'm keen to test, to be honest, being as without AppleCare a screen replacement is $399, and a back panel replacement is $599. Which is a huge joke when you consider almost any Android phone's replacement back glass is around $12, and you can do it yourself. Anyway, ranting aside, on the left side is the alert switch and volume buttons. The top is completely blank aside from some antenna bands. On the right side is the power/Siri button, and the single SIM card slot, though a second eSIM can be used in tandem. On the bottom is one of the 2 stereo speakers, the other being housed in a notch on the front, the fast charge capable Lightning port, which Apple really needs to swap in favor of USB-C, and then there's the asymmetrical microphone holes as well as a few more antenna bands. On the front is a 6.5-inch notch display, Face ID system, and secondary stereo speaker. Around back are Apple's triple camera system, as well as a quad LED flash and microphone. Holding all this together is some very strong adhesive. The iPhone 11 Pro series of phones takes it a step further, with an IP68 water and dust resistance rating, up to 4 meters for 30 minutes, with most phones being IP68 certified for up to 2 meters for 30 minutes. It's a strange thing where the market stands as far as smartphone audio is concerned. On one hand, almost every phone is available with stereo speakers, but not many have headphone jacks. The iPhone is no different. While I've gotten used to not having a headphone jack, it goes without saying I'd much rather have one built in than not. While Bluetooth has improved a great deal over the years, I'm still not convinced of the trade-offs. Being that you have to charge a separate device, batteries degrade over time, etc. But that's a tale for another day. While it's true you can just use the dongle, which is still not included in the box, that doesn't trump the convenience factor of wired headphones, especially when you need to charge and listen at the same time. That being said, performance from Apple's 3.5mm to Lightning adapter is, okay. It's not bad, but it's certainly not LG Quad DAC good either. It's just passable. The stereo speakers are quite another story. Their volume, bass, and clarity are nearly unmatched, except by phones such as the Razer phone and the newest Galaxy S and Note devices. They're great not only for casual listeners, but for small gatherings as well, foregoing the need, in some instances, for a Bluetooth speaker. Apple nailed it here. More often than not, I don't end up using headphones while listening to music or viewing content. Smartphone performance continues to rival that of computers, at least in terms of compute benchmarks. This holds true with the latest iPhones, with the 11 series phones, and mine specifically, pulling in single-core scores of 5300 to 5500, and multi-core scores of 14,800 to 15,000. Impressive for a fanless, passively cooled device that fits in your pocket. I've ran multiple matches of Fortnite on my iPhone, and kept steady frame rates without lag or stutter, which is crazy when you consider just how much can go on during these games. Multitasking and just general navigation through the interface is no different. It's a fast and responsive phone, other than some issues I've had with iOS 13. More on that later. The iPhone 11 Pro Max is a strong, solid performer. I'd even go as far to say that the A13 Bionic chip inside, paired with 4GB of RAM, is overkill for most people who would buy this phone. The A13 is a 6-core monster built on a 7nm process, and it is bar none the most powerful processor in a phone right now. This, paired with 4GB of RAM and 64, 256, or 512GB of storage, makes the iPhone great for even heavy tasks in gaming. Though 64GB is nowhere near enough storage in 2020. I'm hoping the base model gets bumped up to 128GB this year. Now we come to where this phone truly separates itself from the competition: the battery. The iPhone 11 Pro Max has the largest battery ever in an iPhone, at a massive 3969 mAh capacity. This phone is an endurance champ. And I know I've said that a few times now, but I'm genuinely blown away by this phone's endurance. With the display at half brightness, I was able to get 12.5 hours of screen on time on a single charge, with 30% battery remaining. And that wasn't a one-off either. I was able to pull down that same figure multiple times. And at 100% brightness, I was still able to get 8 hours of screen on time. Wow. Included in the box is an 18-watt fast charger. About damn time, Apple. That dinky 5-watt brick is hardly even sufficient for the Apple Watch. With the included charger, it takes just over 2 hours for a full charge from empty. Not bad, but the included chargers with competitors' phones are still much faster. Though it slows down to a trickle charge at 90% to preserve battery longevity, so you can't be too upset about it. And if that's too slow for you, you can purchase a 30-watt fast charger from Apple for a hefty $60. Though it still trickle charges after it reaches 90%, so I wouldn't suggest this for most people, especially since the option to wirelessly charge is still here. I'm so confident with the battery life of this phone, I'll leave the house for several days without even thinking twice about not bringing a charger along. Naturally, being an iPhone, it's running iOS, more specifically iOS 13. And let me tell you, I have had nothing but bugs and crashes on iOS 13. This is the worst version of iOS I have ever used. From disappearing keyboards, to not being able to scroll back to the bottom of iMessage conversations, to my iPhone and iPad Pro crashing and refusing to power back on. iOS 13 has been an absolute nightmare for me, and has been really the only sore spot of this brilliant iPhone. Thankfully, these issues have all been intermittent, but come on, Apple, you put out unfinished software? At least we have a system-wide dark mode now though, right? Like the iPhone XS and 10 before it, the 11 Pro series phones use gesture-based controls. A swipe from the top left gets you your notification panel. A swipe from the top right pulls down the control center for volume and brightness as well as other functions. A swipe up and hold from the bottom calls up your recent apps, while a slide across the bottom of the screen quickly switches between apps currently running in the background. This is a great system for gestures once you've gotten into the swing of things, and I'm glad it's being adopted market-wide. Unfortunately for some, this year in order to accommodate such a large battery, Force Touch is gone on a hardware level. Instead replaced by Haptic Touch, which tries its best to emulate Force Touch, and in my experience it does a pretty fair job. Not that I use the feature all that often. While we're on the topic of software, a brilliant combination of software and hardware is Face ID, comprised of an infrared camera for low light unlocking, a flood illuminator also for low light assistance, as well as a typical suite of proximity and ambient light sensors. The selfie camera and a dot projector, which essentially creates a 3D map of your face within the phone to recognize you and unlock your phone. While I still prefer fingerprint scanners, especially the almost magical under-display sensors of Samsung devices, Face ID is great because it's fast and doesn't require any thought to use. You just look at the phone, swipe up, and bam, you're in. It's almost effortless, and you forget your phone is even locked once you get a pattern of use down. I once mocked Face ID, but now I'm a believer. It's been said that sufficiently advanced technology is nearly indistinguishable from magic. And as much as I hate to admit it, Face ID is indeed magical. Smartphone cameras have become a primary selling point of phones, with more people than ever relying on their phones to capture those treasured moments. Sometimes even making a career out of smartphone photography. And boy, has the iPhone 11 series of devices really stepped up the game in a big way. These are some of the best photos you can get from a smartphone right now, and certainly a large leap over the cameras found on the XS series. They're comprised of 3 sensors around back, all of 12 megapixel resolution. The first is a 12 megapixel wide-angle lens with an aperture of f1.8 with dual pixel phase detection autofocus. The second is a 12 megapixel 2x optical zoom telephoto lens with an aperture of f2.0, also with phase detection autofocus, both of which are optically stabilized. And the third lens, and my favorite trend in smartphones, is a 12 megapixel ultra-wide angle lens with an aperture of f2.4 and a field of view of 120 degrees. Shots from these cameras are incredible, and don't suffer from the issues of all having a different color science to them. They all look exactly the same as far as color temperature is concerned, boasting great detail, dynamic range, and contrast. Perhaps more impressive is the fact that every camera on this phone can record up to 4K 60 FPS. Including the front 12 megapixel selfie camera with its f2.2 aperture. Furthermore, these cameras can also record 1080p 30, 60, and even 120 and 240 FPS slow motion, with the exception of the front camera capping off at 120 FPS for what Apple calls slow fees. But please don't ever call it that. In fact, this is the last time I intend to speak of it. Another great addition to the camera's recording modes is a super steady mode, similar to what Samsung has done this year, which makes even 4K footage look great when handheld. Perhaps the best feature Apple has implemented this year, however, is their night mode, which honestly blew me away. The amount of detail in dark environments paired with the lack of noise is just outstanding. Before this year, it was Google that was not only the camera king, but the low light king as well. And it wasn't even close. This year, not so much. These cameras are some of the very best on any phone right now, bar none. The iPhone 11 series continues the trend at large in the smartphone market of outrageous pricing, with a base price of $1,100 going all the way up to $1,450 for the 512GB model, like I have here. It's available in some fun colors though, such as black, silver, gold, and a gorgeous midnight green color, and has been available on all major US carriers since September 20th, 2019. I may not like the pricing, but it is what it is and everyone else is doing it. It stings a little less if you can get it on installment plans through your carrier, though. Each year, people go mad for the new iPhones. Despite the stagnation of the market, the iPhone and really any Apple product are an enigma, constantly selling in massive numbers despite the perceived lack of new features and sky-high pricing. Apple plays it safe with a third year of similar design philosophies, which is quite normal for Apple. That's not to say it's a bad design, despite the fidget spinner looking camera array on the back. It's grown on me. And I'd even go as far as to use the word beautiful in describing this phone. So what's the deal with the new iPhone 11 Pro Max? Should you buy one? That depends. If you're coming from an older iPhone 8, 10, or something even older, I would say it's a solid upgrade worth your money. But if you're on the last gen 10s or 10s Max, I would say skip it in favor of the 2020 iPhones, whatever they're going to be called. Unless you already upgrade yearly through Apple or your carrier, I just don't think it's worth it. Don't get me wrong, this is an amazing phone, despite the software issues I've had on iOS 13, and the very similar design to last year's model. Even with its flaws, even with the infuriating crashes, and the high price, this iPhone has had my main SIM card in it almost the entire time I've owned it. Because it's one of the very best phones you can buy right now. From its battery life, to its display and incredible cameras, down to its mostly smooth performance, this phone is worthy of recommendation even if the new 2020 iPhones are just around the corner. Thanks for watching. I'm Dave with TechDove. Subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss my Galaxy Note 10 Plus review coming soon. Follow me on Instagram at TechDove for updates on the latest reviews and phones.